Sirach. Wrath and anger are hateful things, yet the sinner hugs them tight. The vengeful will suffer the Lord's vengeance, for he remembers their sins in detail. Forgive your neighbor's injustice, then when you pray, your own sins will be forgiven. Could anyone nourish anger and refuse mercy to another? Seek pardon for his own sins. If any who is but flesh cherishes wrath, who will forgive his sins? Remember your last days. Set enmity aside. Remember death and decay, and cease from sin. Think of the commandments. Hate not your neighbor. Remember the Most High covenant, and overlook faults. The word of your Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Our responsorial psalm, bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name, after each responsive reading.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all my being, bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all my benefits.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
He pardons all your iniquities, heals all your ills. He redeems your life from destruction, crowns you with kindness and compassion.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
He will not always chide, nor does he keep his wrath forever. Not according to our sins does he deal with us, nor does he requite us according to our crimes.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
For as the heavens are high above the earth, so surpassing is the kindness toward those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far he puts our transgressions from us.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy
A reading from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans. Brothers and sisters, none of us lives for oneself, and no one dies for oneself. For if we live for the Lord. And if we die for the Lord. So then, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. For this is why Christ died and came to life, that he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive? As many as 7 times? Jesus answered, I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a huge amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, and all of his property, in payment of the debt. At that, the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full. Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave the loan. When the servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, Pay back what you owe. Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, Be patient with me, and I will pay you back. But he refused. Instead, he had the fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now, when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant, as I had pity on you? Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives your brother from your heart. This, my brothers and sisters, is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My brothers and sisters, a number of years ago, somebody took on a project to do a study of the great religions of the world, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, with a view of discovering what might be said to be the special distinguishing characteristic, predominant feature of each of those religions. I don't remember what the answer was for most of the other religions, but it's always stayed with me what this impartial scholar came up with from the teachings and practices of Christianity as what is the special characteristic of Christianity: forgiveness. Not to say that forgiveness isn't a part of other religions, but that it is supposed to be at the heart of what Christianity is all about. And if we think about how God self-revealed through Jesus, it certainly is as a God of mercy, forgiveness, seeker of reconciliation, welcoming of the lost and the strayed. And as Jesus has certainly taught in so many ways, especially, for example, in the parable of today's gospel, we're made in God's image. If God, who is love, can be described as the God of mercy, always seeking to forgive and welcome back, we are meant to do the same. The two people in this parable illustrate the truth of this. One who was owed a tremendous debt, when pleaded with to help, to have a chance to pay it back, simply said, "It's forgiven." The other, who had been forgiven, just couldn't have it in his heart to have that same attitude towards a brother who had a small debt towards him. And therefore, when the master heard about it, we see he punished the selfish, ungrateful servant. And the conclusion of today's gospel brings it to a head by when Jesus says, "So will my heavenly Father deal with you, unless each of you forgives your brother or sister from your heart." From your heart. You know, sometimes I've had the experience, I've been on both ends of this. Sometimes I've had the experience where someone really hurt me, and they come eventually and say, "You know, I realized that when I said that, that was really hurtful to you. I apologize." And I said, "Oh, I've forgotten about it, never gave it another thought." That's not forgiveness. That's brushing them off. I'm probably still holding some resentment. I can't say I forgive you. Let's be friends again. And I've had that experience when I've sought pardon from someone that I realize I've offended, whether intentionally or not. You know, if there's one prayer we all know, it's the Lord's Prayer, the Our Father. And if you ever look at it from this perspective, you'll notice, as you probably have, that in the Our Father there are 6 petitions, 6 things we ask God for. One of them is different from the others because it has a condition. You know, we say, "Give us this day our daily bread," not "give us this day our daily bread" if we work really hard for it. Just "give us this day our daily bread. Lead us not into temptation." But we say, "Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." That's a risky thing to say, if you think about it. We're saying to God, "I ask that you forgive me to the extent that I'm willing to forgive those who have offended me." God doesn't expect perfection from us in that, but that we take that as a goal, that we seek to live in peace and reconciliation, if necessary, with all, and that we can forgive, even if we don't always feel like it, or think the person deserves it, or whatever way we can try to justify holding a grudge. You know, 3 years ago, 4 of my brothers and sisters and I had the real joy of taking a trip to France together, to Normandy, to the area where 375 years ago, one of our ancestors had left France and gone to Quebec to be a fisherman. And somehow someone had traced back the roots and discovered that one of his brothers had stayed there and actually found the present-day descendants. So when we went to France together, one of the highlights of our trip was to meet these, I guess you'd have to say, very distant cousins. And yet it was remarkable because when we went to the home of one of the cousins and her husband, an elderly couple who lived with her married daughter, greeted them, sat down to them. It was like we'd known each other all our lives, you know? There's something about family. Now, in the course of the meal, the daughter said, "I have a brother and you're going to meet him later. He's very anxious to meet you." And we said, "Oh, okay." They had kind of a day planned for us. But what was kind of surprising was when we had finished our time there with the family and had the wonderful meal they had prepared for us, we went out into the yard to get to our cars, and there was the brother in the backyard. And I thought, isn't that strange? Why wasn't he in the house with the rest of us? Here he is with his wife and granddaughter, and the rest of the day he spent showing us around the area and where they would have sailed from, all that sort of thing. Later I found out what the story was. 50 years earlier, this man had had a big argument with his father, the elderly man of the couple. It apparently had something to do with whether he should stay in school or go follow the career that he wanted. So they didn't quite come to blows, but they had a violent argument, and he left the house and literally joined a crew of a ship and sailed away. And from that day on, he had never seen or spoken to his father, and vice versa. When his sister assured him that his father wasn't home, he would go and see his mother. It was hard to comprehend that someone could hold a grudge and a resentment. Both of them, neither one willing to take the first step, because each had offended the other, a father and a son. We heard that within the next year, both parents died. And all of a sudden, he was the dutiful son, preparing for the funeral, providing expenses and everything. But his father died, alienated from his son. That's an invitation and a challenge of Jesus to all of us today. Maybe that's an extreme case, but do I still harbor resentment, hold a grudge, keep my distance, maybe even do things to show my displeasure towards an individual, a group, a family who I feel has offended me or someone I care for, and feel justified? They've never asked for forgiveness. Jesus is saying, you're made in the image of God. God is love. God, the God you know, is the God of mercy and forgiveness. When you pray to that God, you ask for that mercy in the measure that you're willing to mete it out to others. I think it would do us all well to look into our hearts and see if there is something, somebody, some circumstance that we have never dealt with in a forgiving way. Now, maybe if we ask forgiveness, we'll be rejected. We have to be able to take that risk. It does take two. But it takes someone to take the initiative, doesn't it? We might even say, that, he offended me more than I offended him. He should be the one that comes and asks for forgiveness first. How about if we're willing to swallow our pride and be the one that takes the initiative? It can be on any level, like I say, within a family, like that tragic example from my own distant relatives. It can be within a neighborhood. It can be with fellow workers. It can be, you name it, between races, as we still see so much a reality in our society today. How can we be agents of reconciliation, of forgiveness, of peace, even though we know we have a right to feel offended? That's not the point. The point is, God has a right to be offended, but God forgives. God loves. God is love. We're God and made in God's image. Now I'm going to segue over to Unbound, not exactly a direct connection, but Unbound is a worldwide Catholic outreach that is certainly founded on offering people here in the United States, in our faith communities, an invitation to live out the commandment of love of neighbor, even love of a stranger who is our neighbor, in a very concrete, personal way. 36 years ago, two young Catholic men from the state of Kansas spent some time living and serving among the poorest of the poor in another part of the world. When they came home, they didn't want to burn their bridges behind them. They wanted to still somehow be connected with the people they had come to know and love. They came up with an idea that they shared at a reunion of their rather extensive family. What if each one of us in our family became what we'll call a sponsor for the child of a poor family that we know back where we just came from? Well, what do we mean by that? Well, when you pray for your loved ones, you pray for those you feel most responsible for. Pray for your sponsored friend and his or her family. Number two, friendship. This would be a personal thing. We're not just going to ask you all to give us a donation and we'll send it to help the poor. Take someone literally into your heart, into your life, into your home, figuratively speaking. Try to get to know them. We'll see that they send you pictures and letters. You can learn more about them and their life and their hopes and dreams. They'd love to know who you are, see you and your family, learn about your lives. Thirdly, because they're from the poorest of the poor, give a gift that can help to make a difference. Well, their relatives, their immediate family, what a great idea. Yeah, we'll do that. And so it began in an informal way in a living room in Kansas. What they hadn't anticipated was that before long, other relatives, people in their church, co-workers, neighbors, said, how can we do what you're doing? So to make a long story short, what started out as an informal outreach in a family circle in Kansas has been blessed by God and grown today to be a worldwide Catholic outreach, still directed by Catholic laity like yourselves, which is on the ground serving in the poorest areas of 19 countries in Africa, Latin America, India, and the Philippines, and over 312,000 poor children, and now also needy senior citizens, have people like us here in the States as their sponsors. It's still the same thing: prayer, friendship, help. Father Joe invited me, since this is why I spend many weekends now that I'm not a parish priest anymore, to share this message and invitation with the people of St. Mary's this weekend. When you came into church, undoubtedly you probably saw tables with photos, folders like this, mostly of children, some of elderly folks. These are people who are pastoral workers living and serving among them, have gotten to know with their families, and have asked us to find sponsors for. I'm holding here one of a little 7-year-old girl named Sharon, who lives in Kenya. If you stop by the table after Mass, you could open this folder, take out this paper. We'll tell you more about Sharon, her family, their circumstances, perhaps some of their hopes and dreams. And if you decide you want to sponsor her, you can take out this form, fill it out, and give it to me or one of the sponsors who's assisting me today at the table. The system, it's exactly the same as it started in the Kansas living room. The prayer, friendship. If you sponsor Sharon, you're her sponsor, you and your family, or 2 or 3 people do it together, your group. I'm not taking her somewhere next week and getting another sponsor. It's a real person-to-person connection that we seek to promote. And then what we ask is the gift. That's the only thing that's changed, because a lot has changed in the world's economy since 1980. We ask that your gift be an amount that will average over the course of a year to at least $36. Some people like to give it monthly, some like to do it at one shot, some certain times of the year when they're better able to. It's entirely up to you. And as the form indicates, you can do it by whatever means is best for you: bank withdrawal, credit, debit, check, cash, money order, and you can change it anytime. And again, it's not something for the rest of your life. It's for as long as you're able and care to. There's no problem if you need to stop. We'll find someone else to pick it up. Does it matter? Does it make a difference? A few of us could go out for a nice brunch after Mass today, and I wouldn't be surprised if when we got the bill it was maybe around $36 for 3 or 4 people. Unless we went to McDonald's, then we could probably save some money. But $36 can literally change a life for someone living in one of the poorer parts of the world. And I'd just like to conclude with 2 real examples that were shared with me by people who had already been sponsors for a while. I was preaching in a church in another state a couple years ago, and after Mass, a couple waited to talk to me till I was free. And they said, "Father, we just wanted to tell you our experience. 11 years ago, we were recently married, and another priest came to our church and spoke just as you did today. And we sat there and thought, isn't that a lovely idea? Hopefully someday we'll be in a position when we can do it. But as we left church and walked by the table, each of us found our eyes drawn as if by a magnet to one folder, to one picture. Finally, we stopped, walked over to the table, picked it up. We saw it was a little 6-year-old girl named Maria. We opened up to read about her. We saw that she lived in a remote mountain village in the Central American country of Nicaragua. That she had just started school in the one-room school in her village that went from kindergarten up to 5th grade. She was very bright, enthused about learning. Her family were dirt poor farmers, as everybody there was for generations. We found we couldn't put it down, so we finally decided, well, Father did assure us we don't have to, we can do this for a while, and then if we have to stop, we can stop. So we filled out the sign-up form and turned it in. Well, Father, 11 years have passed. It wasn't always easy, but somehow we never had to stop. At that point, the wife opened her purse and pulled out another picture. It wasn't of a little 6-year-old girl, it was of a beautiful young lady. They said, Father, this is Maria today. This is her high school graduation picture. Now we might say, well, that's nice, but that was almost a miracle. Because as I mentioned, in her village, there was only a school that went up to the 5th grade. To go to school beyond that, your family had to find another family in a distant town where there was a high school, pay room and board for you to live there while you went to class, buy your required uniform, textbooks, everything else. And it was totally beyond the means of these poorest of the poor. But because Maria was so motivated, did so well in her early grades, and because we were encouraging her and her parents had come to realize that we would help, they decided to take the risk and let her go to high school. As you can see, she flourished. She graduated with honors. She was the first person in her family, and very likely the first person from her village ever to graduate from high school. And Father, she wrote to us when she sent the picture, and she said, I have been accepted in the university. I want to be a teacher. I couldn't help but think, in the years to come, how many more young lives are going to be blessed when Maria, this child born into a supposedly endless cycle of poverty and ignorance in the back of the beyond, is serving as their dedicated teacher. Simply because someone like you or me decided to make her a part of our lives, and from our little mite, make a dream come true. The other example I'll give you, and I'll conclude with, is similar. Not too long after that, in another state, in another parish where I was preaching the same message, a gentleman waited to talk to me after Mass. And he said, he didn't have a picture, and I can't remember the country, but he said, a number of years ago I began to sponsor a young boy. I've just received a letter from him. And this is what he wrote. My dear sponsor, I want you to be the first to hear my good news. I have just received the information that I have been accepted in the seminary to begin studying to be a Catholic priest. Dear sponsor, I hope you will never forget that if you hadn't taken me into your life, I simply would never have seen the inside of a schoolhouse door. And now, because that gentleman did accept him, he is able to hear and follow a call that God placed in his heart, and someday serve the Lord and his people as a priest. We just never know when we cast our bread on the waters how it will come back as a blessing, certainly for us, but in ways we might never foresee for others. It could be education, like I've given you 2 examples. It could be necessary health care, could be safer, more healthy living conditions. It could be as simple as food in times of shortage. Our pastoral workers in the communities meet regularly with the parents to help decide together what is the best way to use the generous gift coming from their sponsor. And they will tell you when they write to you what you have made possible. So I hope the response at the earlier Mass was so great. I hope many of you may want to also become part of our wonderful family of sponsors. And as I said, some other people who are already sponsors will be there, happy to talk with you, answer questions, assist you, and hopefully receive from you the filled out sponsorship form. Please don't take a folder home without turning in the form. Again, I thank your pastor for his support and encouragement in this invitation, and all of you for this chance to share the Eucharist with you. May God give each of us and all of us together truly loving, forgiving, caring hearts. God bless you.